Hello, this is Mr. Vargas, and in this video, I'm going to go over question 4 of the 2021 APCSA exam. Question 4 is always a 2D array question. So let's look at the question. It's called ArrayResizer. So you have a class called ArrayResizer, and ArrayResizer has 3 methods in here. Two of the methods you have to code. One of them is a helper method that you're gonna use to do the second question. But let's look at the first method we have to do first, and then we'll look at the rest of this. So the first method is called isNonZero row. It takes in an array and it takes in a row number. And if you read the comments, it says true. It returns true if and only if every value in row R of this array is non-zero. So let's scroll down to the next page, and they give you some more details about this question, this method that you have to write. And yeah, they have a nice example right here. So for example, if we had a 2D array called ARR and it had this data in there, and you called isNonZero row and you sent in ARR and let's say 0, well, this will look at row 0 and it will check to see if every value here is non-zero. And as you can see, that's not true because this value right here, the last item in row 0 is a 0. So it would return false because this is a non-zero row. But if you did isNonZero row with ARR and this time you did row 1, well, in this case, that's not a 0, that's not a 0, that's not a 0, so it returns true, right? All values in row 1 are non-zero. If for row 2 over here, you would get false because they're all zeros, right? For the last row, you would get true because there are no zeros. So that's basically what you have to do. You're taking in a 2D array, you're taking in a row, and you have to just return true if there are any, if you return false if there are any zeros, and you return true if there are no zeros. So let's, this is just the rubric. I'll refer to that later. Let's go to my BlueJ so we can start coding this. So now, usually with 2D arrays, so whenever you're dealing with arrays and you have to traverse them, you need to use a for loop. And with 2D arrays, you might be used to always using 2 for loops. One for loop to go through all the rows, right? So row 0, row 1, row 2. And then another for loop to go through each element in that row. But you do not have to do that here. So I think maybe, so yeah, you don't have to do that here. Why? Because you don't have to go through all the rows. You only have to check one row, and they're telling you what row you have to check. So essentially, you're only doing this for loop. You're only doing the one that goes through the different, through the columns, basically. So let's start there. So we're going to do for int c equals 0, and c is less than, so c starts at 0, and c is going to go through all of the elements in this row. So we're gonna do array 2D, and you can just put R here. Or technically, because our array is a perfect, the 2D array is a perfect square, you could put like array 0, but we'll just do it, we'll leave it like this. Array 2D R. And dot length, we can't forget that, right? So array 2D R dot length. So that'll give us the length of this row, and then C++. All right. Now we are going to check to see if any element in this row is a 0. So if array 2D, R, now R is never going to change, right? Whatever value, if a 1 was sent in, it'll just be 1. But C will change. C will start at 0, and it will go to the end of this row. If any element is 0, then we can return false. And that will go through the entire row, and if at any point encounters a 0, it returns false. If it never encounters a 0, that means this for loop will be done, and then we can just return true right underneath it. And it's as simple as that. All right, so that's the first one, and that one was worth 3 points, and you get 1 point for comparing any item in the 2D array with 0. So any item. So this is where if you're not sure what to do, but the main point of this is to look for zeros. You can just compare any item to 0, and you would get a point. You get another point for accessing every item of row R. So that's basically this for loop, having the for loop in there, and then array 2D RC in here. And then you get another point for returning true, for it working. So for this question, you can get an easy point for comparing any item to 0. But besides that, the other 2 points, you kind of have to, it almost feels like you kind of have to get to a solution or close to the solution to get the point, the other 2 points. So let's go look at question B now. So question B it's called resize. And this is going to return a new, possibly smaller 2D array that contains only the rows from array 2D with no zeros. Okay, so you're going to take in a 2D array, and then you're going to return a 2D array that has all of the rows, but the ones without zeros. So for example, the same ARR, it started out with 4 rows, but after you do resize will return a new array that will look like this: 1, 3, 2, and 4, 5, 6. So will only have this row and this row. Now they do have a helper method for you. The helper method is called num of non-zero rows, and that method just returns the number of rows that contain no zeros. So that basically tells you the rows. So basically you can use that to help you figure out the size of this new smaller 2D array, because the columns are going to be the same, right? This had 3 columns. The new one has 3 columns. So the columns will be the same, but the rows will be different. And using is non-zero row, you can figure out how many rows this new array is going to have. So let's go code this one. All right. So why don't we create the new array that we're going to return, right? So it's going to be int bracket, and we could call it new 2D array. And it's going to be a new int array. And usually you do bracket, and then you got to put the size in here, right? So the number of rows I just mentioned, we're going to use num non-zero rows. Now, I just put this in as a placeholder. They don't give you the logic. Like, in a lot of these questions, they just say implementation not shown for num-zero rows, but you can assume it works. But num non-zero rows will tell us how many rows this new array is going to have. So we're going to call num non-zero rows. And in parentheses, we are going to put the array, right? Array 2D. That's the array that was sent in as a parameter. So num non-zero rows with this array will tell you, like, if there's 2 non-zero rows, this will return a 2. All right, so that's how we have R. And then to get C doesn't change. C of the new array is going to be the same as the number of columns in the old array, right? So the number of columns in the old array is array 2D, and let's just get the length of the first row because all of the rows have the same length. So row 0 dot length. That gives us the size of our new 2D array. And I'll go more into the scoring later, but you would get a point for doing that. Where is it? Declares and creates a new 2D array of the correct size. So you would get 1 point for creating that new 2D array. All right. And now let's start traversing this array, looking for non-zero rows. And whenever we find a non-zero row, we're going to add it to the new 2D array. So we're going to be going through array 2D. And whenever we have a non-zero row, we're going to add that row to new 2D array. So we're going to do for int r equals 0. R is less than array 2D dot length r plus plus. That will go through all of the rows. And now we can go through all of the elements in each of the rows, but actually we don't want to do that just yet. Before we don't care about a row if it is if it has zeros in it. So we only care about the rows that have no zeros. And one thing that they tell you in this question, I kind of went over that part quickly, but they tell you that you can use the method you made in part 1 in this one. And actually, I should rephrase that. You can use is non-zero row. Even if you left the first one blank, you can use is non-zero row and assume that it works correctly. So we only care about the row if it's non-zero. So if is non-zero row, and we're gonna do array 2D r, right? So because r starts at 0, so we'll look at row 0 of array 2D. Is that a non-zero row? If it isn't, then we can skip it, and then r will become 1, and then we'll check row 1. Is row 1 a non-zero row? Well, let's say row 1 is a non-zero row. Well, now we can start looking at the elements of that row. So for int c equals 0, c is less than array 2D r dot length, and then c plus plus. So we found a non-zero row. Now we're gonna start at the beginning of this non-zero row, and we're going to keep adding the elements to the new 2D array. So new 2D array. Now this is where it might get a little tricky, right? New 2D array. So we're gonna start adding this stuff, and the problem is, what index do we add it to? We want to start at index 0, but after you've added this row, you want to start at the next row. So you need to create a variable to keep track of the row we're on. So I'm going to create a variable up here, int new row index equals 0, and we're going to do so if new to the array, new row index c is going to be equal to array 2D rc. So whenever you find a non-zero row, you're going to take the elements in that non-zero row and you're going to put them in the new 2D array. C will be the same, but the row will be different because the new array is going to have less rows than the old one, because the new array doesn't have any of the rows that contain zeros. And to keep track of this, we create a variable, and so we create a variable to keep track of this. And after you populate a row in the new to the array, you have to increase this variable. So new row index plus plus. And that is, so we're missing one thing. We have to return. Oh, I forgot to do something over here. What did I forget? I forgot a parentheses there. And a semicolon over here. And we need a return. So finally, we're gonna return our new to the array. So return new to the array. And that is it. That is question B, or part B of question 4. You get 1 point for calling the to helper method. So if you call is non-zero anywhere, it doesn't even matter what you do with it. If you call is non-zero and you call num of non-zero rows, you get 1 point. You get a point for identifying rows with no zeros, and it says in the context of an if. So basically, the is non-zero rows, as soon as you put that inside of an if, you get another point for that. We already mentioned how you get a point for creating the new 2D array. You get a point for maintaining an index in the new array. So that's what I was talking about right here. Creating a new row index and then increasing it every time you populate a row. You get a point for traversing all necessary elements of the 2D array. So that's basically, did you set up your nested for loops correctly? And then copies all and only rows identified as having non-zeros. So basically, does it work? Like, are you only copying the non-zero rows? And that's pretty much it. So, it was a tougher question. This was, it had the lowest score that year. And this actually was one of the lower scoring questions of the last couple of years. But hopefully that made sense. Thank you for watching.